Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Anthony Joshua has logged a so-so performance in his return fight, getting the first win in the past couple of years following back-to-back losses to unified champion Alexander Usyk, getting the decision at the O2 against Jermaine Franklin on all three cards, 117-111 for two cards and 118-111 on the third judge's scorecard. So 3 rounds for Jermaine Franklin, so they're saying it was a 9-3 sort of fight. Yeah, I mean, that kind of feels like what I sort of saw, probably most of you as well. Jermaine Franklin, competitive in most rounds, but for the most part, getting outlanded in terms of meaningful shots. Joshua was able to use the height and the reach, but it was just an okay performance from Joshua. And I guess when you consider the back-to-back losses, the new trainer, I can understand, and there's a little bit of leeway there to go, well, he was probably doing things a little bit different, but it didn't look like a world-level performance there from someone regarded as a world-level fighter. And perhaps that's because there's confidence issues, there's a transition to a new trainer, 3 trainers in 3 different fights. So you have a situation where Joshua was, for the most part, not committing to throwing combinations all that often. He wasn't following the instruction from Derek James from the corner. He was telling him to let his hands go combinations, especially throw the left hook. Throw your right hand, follow it with the left hook. Couldn't really seem to follow through. Was just a bit hesitant at times. And maybe given all that's happened in the last few years, getting knocked out by Andy Ruiz Jr. as well, we've seen a more sort of safety first version of Anthony Joshua. Maybe that's just who he is at the moment. For Jermaine Franklin, I mean, you have to give him a bit of credit. The guy's got a chin. He took a number of big shots, but Joshua didn't really seem to adapt as maybe he might. When things weren't really sort of breaking Franklin down, you know, he was taking some of the shots, Joshua wasn't sort of adjusting his game plan. I mean, one of the things that I thought was a deficit for Joshua in the fight was the body shots. Jermaine Franklin, I think it was round 2, there was a big left hook to the body, and Franklin started to sag a bit. But Joshua didn't really sort of see that and just sort of fell in and almost kept Franklin sort of from sagging further. So it clearly made a dent in him. And then later in the fight, we saw a big left hook again. I think it was around 11. And Franklin again clearly backed off this time because it did have an impact. So a situation Joshua just delivers a so-so performance. And I think many of us, especially early on, you know, there was an air of what's going to happen. What version of Joshua do we have? And I don't really think we learned anything more, because Joshua was able to largely use his height and reach differences. He looked like the much bigger man in there to his advantage. He was able to, you know, pick up some points through different rounds by landing the jab. He was making Jermaine Franklin fall short because Franklin 4 or 5 inches shorter than him, and obviously the reach disadvantage as well. So, and the other thing was, when Franklin was landing, he doesn't have a lot on his shots, so Joshua was able to, for the most part, it looked like he easily absorbed most of Franklin's best work, but there just wasn't enough of it. So it was a case that Joshua, at a career-high weight, wasn't made to work that hard, especially in those earlier rounds. There was a question, what's going to happen if this goes late? Is Joshua going to be able to manage his energy reserves? And because it wasn't a frenetic pace, Joshua was largely able to dictate the pace and the sort of direction and the story of the fight, because Franklin seemingly looking for a counter and not much more. There was a few times where late on it looked like he was putting on a little bit of a sort of, I've got to sort of let my hands go here, but it wasn't sustained and it wasn't really as successful as he needed it to be. By about round 8 or 9, it was clear that he must have been down on the cards and that he had to basically try to sell out in the later rounds to try make something happen. But even in round 12, barely didn't do it. Actually, the most intense part of the fight happened after the fight, because they ended up having a bit of a handbags at dawn situation, had to be separated. But then what happened was Tony Bellew, who was on commentary as a sideline reporter for DAZN, gets into an altercation with someone in Jermaine Franklin's team, and that was reported over the broadcast by Andy Lee. So, I mean, a clear lack of professionalism from Tony Bellend, and the guy needs to be sacked off by DAZN, clearly, because he's a complete clown. The company man demeanor, and, that's so grating already, and then having sort of, scraps on the ringside, and you're actually working. I mean, come on. Anyway, getting back to things. I mean, a lot of people are going to look at this and go, Joshua has sort of declined. I mean, could be a situation where he sort of fought to the level of the opposition to an extent. In part, remember, this was a tune-up. It was a comeback fight. They picked Franklin. It was safe matchmaking. They knew what Franklin brought and basically what he was going to do, and that he was not a big power puncher. So Joshua was able to sort of fight his own fight, and, with the transition to the new trainer, Derek James, well, he just kind of, went out there and did what he wanted to do, and Franklin wasn't able to really put him under any intense pressure through the fight. Sure, he's got a hell of a chin, but it didn't really sort of, he didn't put a dent in Joshua as he thought he probably could. He talked a big game, but didn't really come looking for the knockout by the look of it. And Joshua too. He seemed to be just a bit tentative, not committing at times. Could have followed through with, bang the left hook on the end of a, jab right hand combination. Didn't. And this is the thing with Joshua now. Where's he really at? Because it wasn't an elite performance, and he wasn't facing an elite fighter. So did he fight down to the level of his opponent, who's maybe top 20 or top 25? I mean, I saw people talking that Franklin was maybe a top 10 to top 15 to top 20. What's he done to get that sort of ranking or, recognition in people's minds? I mean, you can go through a lot of fighters and get a pretty clear top 20, and I don't think Jermaine Franklin fits in it. Sure, he's a durable fighter, and he's had, some okay wins against the likes of Rydell Booker, Jerry Forrest. Those two fights were heavily contested and a little bit controversial. Pavel Sauer, he lost to Dillian White. Joshua didn't put an elite performance against a guy who's not an elite fighter. They might have talked big games, but they ultimately didn't deliver. So I can understand why the knives are going to be out from some quarters. And I know some people will say Joshua's washed. I mean, I'm not going to say that, but I don't think we saw anything new. I don't think we really saw the development having the new trainer. But to some extent, that is expected. It's going to take a while for things to mesh with Derek James. But the thing is, if Joshua's against a guy who has, a similar reach, and he's got some pop in his punches, it could be trouble. Joshua, had all the advantages here, and ultimately that was in his favor, and he sort of fought the fight that he wanted to fight. Guys who are actually in the top echelon in the heavyweight division are going to make Joshua work a lot harder. They're going to put him under more pressure. They're going to have a better outcome against him than what he had up against him tonight. And I don't want to say Jermaine Franklin's not any good, but it was one of those fights where it was competitive to a point. Joshua was mostly able to win most of the rounds because he was doing a little bit more or just landing the more telling shots. And some of that was because Franklin couldn't overcome the height and reach disadvantages. But also Franklin never tried to push AJ, never tried to wear out that gas tank. And ultimately, he didn't sell out in the end. And I mean, if anyone wants to say Franklin won, I didn't even think I can find 4 rounds for him, let alone 6 or 7. So it is what it is in terms of the win. After the fight, Joshua actually said, to the crowd, who do you want me to fight? And it generally, there was sort of a mixture of names, but it seemed to be Fury was the most clear. He was told that, and he looked for half a second a little surprised. And I mean, I wonder with Dillian White having been in the building, if White was wanting to get up there to try get in the ring and call him out. He wants that final payday, that sort of cash out payday against Joshua, because of what's he going to get elsewhere. A third fight with Derek Chisora is probably not going to generate the sort of interest and money that White will clearly be looking for, especially as White, I think, is completely washed. But he said, look, the ball is in Tyson Fury's court. It would be an honor to fight for the WBC title. And he said, look, we're both not getting any younger. I mean, I'm not confident or convinced it's going to happen next. Hearn's already been out in the media in the past week or two talking that prospect down, saying it's, look, they've just been trying to A-side Alexander Usyk to death and the fight's fallen through. Imagine what's going to happen to us with no belt. And Usyk had 3. Joshua had also made comments similar to that. So I don't think it's likely. But given what we saw in there from Joshua, I think he is going to need 1 or 2 more fights, especially to bed in and gel with Derek James a bit more. But one or two more fights before he steps into anything meaningful. And given he doesn't have a belt at the moment, he's not beholden to any sanctioning body, maybe they just need to take the time, keep him off pay-per-view, just keep him on the subscription, because I think we need to see a bit more from him, see some improvement to go, okay, he's ready for something bigger and better. Because if you throw him in with Tyson Fury right now, based off what we saw against Jermaine Franklin, he's going to lose. And I know some people might say, oh, it's premature, but come on. You have to be realistic about what we saw in there. Anthony Joshua looked okay, but no more. What did you make of the fight? What did you make of the performance overall? I mean, I kind of was disappointed in both Joshua and Franklin. I don't think either set out to actually do what they'd said they were going to try to do ahead of the fight. But that's boxing. Expect the unexpected, and sometimes, it is a failure to launch situation. Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.